Good evening, virtual audience, and welcome. Thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Marisa LaFleur, and on behalf of Harvard Bookstore, I'm very pleased to introduce this event with Amelia Pang presenting her book, Made in China, A Prisoner, an SOS Letter, and the Hidden Cost of America's Cheap Goods, joined in conversation by Barbara Demick. I hope you're all well and safe. Thank you for joining us. Through virtual events like tonight's, Harvard Bookstore continues to bring authors and their work to our community, both local and virtual, during these challenging times. Every week, we'll be hosting events here on our Zoom account. As always, our event schedule appears on our website at harvard.com/events. And there you can also sign up for our email newsletter and browse our bookshelves from your home. This evening's discussion will conclude with some time for your questions. If you have a question for our speakers at any time during the talk tonight, click on the Q&A button, which you can see at the bottom of your screen, and we'll get through as many as time allows. In the chat, I'll be posting a link to purchase Made in China at harvard.com, as well as a link to donate in support of this series and our store. Your purchases and financial contributions make events like tonight's possible and help ensure the future of a landmark independent bookstore. So thank you so much for showing up and tuning in support of our authors and the incredible staff of booksellers at Harvard Bookstore. We really appreciate your support now and always. And finally, as you may have experienced in virtual gatherings these last many months, technical issues may arise. If they do, we'll do our best to resolve them quickly, but we thank you for your patience and understanding. And now I'm so pleased to introduce tonight's speakers. Amelia Pang is an award-winning investigative journalist whose work has appeared in such publications as Mother Jones, The New Republic, and the New York Times Sunday Review. Additionally, she is currently an editor at EdTech magazine. In 2017, she received first place in investigative journalism from the Los Angeles Press Club for her undercover reporting on the exploitation of smuggled immigrants who are recruited to work in Chinese restaurants. She has also received first place in feature writing from the New York Press Association and first place in gender LGBTQ reporting from the LA Press Club. She'll be in conversation tonight with Barbara Demick, the former Beijing bureau chief for the Los Angeles Times and author of several books, including Nothing to Envy, Ordinary Lives in North Korea, which won the Samuel Johnson Prize for Nonfiction in the UK. She has won numerous other awards and has been a finalist for the National Book Award, the Pulitzer Prize, and the National Book Critics Circle Award. She is currently a fellow at the New York Public Library's Cullman Center. Tonight, they'll be discussing Amelia's book, Made in China, which investigates the story of a Chinese political prisoner forced into grueling labor and many others like him caught in a network of forced labor camps responsible for the mass production of consumer goods for America. The New York Times calls the book timely and urgent and describes Amelia as a dogged investigator. And in a starred review, Publishers Weekly describes Made in China as engrossing and deeply reported. This impressive expose will make readers think twice about their next purchase. We're so pleased to have both Amelia and Barbara here to discuss Made in China tonight. Without further ado, the digital podium is yours, Amelia and Barbara.
Thank you so much for having me tonight.
Thank you. Also, I'm very happy to be here, such as is. Amelia's book is, yes, very timely and urgent, and also very personal in a way that a lot of investigative books are not. And I was going to start off really by asking about how you stumbled on this story and, well, why it resonated so much for you.
Yes, I found out about this story at the same time the world did when this particular SOS letter went viral in the media. In 2012, an American suburban mom named Julie Keith opens this brand new package of Halloween decorations from Kmart, and out falls an SOS letter that's written by the very political prisoner who had made this product in a labor camp. And so the book tells his story, what ended up happening to him, but it also zooms out to look at these deep problems in our supply chain and the really flawed ways that a lot of corporations are auditing their Chinese suppliers I took an interest in the story mainly because, you know, this SOS letters like these unfortunately get discovered all the time. This is not the first letter, nor was it the last letter. But perhaps it just, there's a really chilling element to this particular letter because it was found in a Halloween decoration. But really, the first letter was this actually arrived in the U.S. in the 90s, and it was written by a pro-democracy activist named Chin Po-kong, who was forced to manufacture artificial flowers in a labor camp for his democracy work. And, you know, it really got a lot of attention and press in the US and even in a congressional hearing. You know, Joe Biden and Nancy Pelosi have made comments about it at the time in the 90s. But since then, these types of letters are still arriving, and products made in forced labor camps are still entering our stores and our homes. And I really wanted to examine why, like what were all the factors that made it easy for something that was manufactured in a labor camp to keep ending up in Kmart's in Oregon.
The letter itself was so chilling. It was from not just any labor camp, but a really notorious place called Masanja. And maybe you can tell us a little bit about the camp and possibly even, you know, read the letter if you have it handy.
Yes, I can read the letter. Masanja was at the time a re-education through labor camp, which are really notorious, the notorious places where really extreme torture happens. It's usually the people who are sent there are often political dissidents and religious dissidents, and who were not reformed enough in previous detentions, and they really wanted to take things to the next level, I guess, in terms of having them assimilate to the policies that the Chinese government would prefer them to assimilate to. And I will actually find.
Sorry, it might be difficult to find the letter. I'll talk for a few minutes just to give Amelia time to look for this letter. So it's really quite a story because the letter is found by, you know, a suburban woman who has like no background in China and really is not, you know, not a human rights activist, but she's obviously somebody smart and with a good heart. And in the book, the way, you know, she pursues it, she goes to the newspapers, she contacts human rights organizations. And, you know, I think at one point she thinks, or her husband thinks, this might be a hoax, but she really pursues it. And a lot of the book sort of follows the timeline of these two people in completely different worlds, this woman in Oregon, all-American, and this Chinese man who has become a dissident. And they're both, you know, fascinating characters in their own way. I mean, she's a more, yeah, I think you would describe her as a more average person. Nothing really extraordinary about her life by an American standard. He is, Sun Yi is very well educated, and he's become a practitioner of Falun Gong, and through the Falun Gong movement becomes something of a dissident and gets himself in trouble. And as Amelia said, this particular labor camp is not like a regular prison. It's for mostly political prisoners. And the treatment there is extremely harsh. I mean, you might think, okay, prison labor in a lot of places. But I mean, this camp is really extraordinary. I don't know, were you able to find the letter, Amelia?
Yes.
Okay, so.
Yes, I can read it. It's written in broken English. It says, "Sir, if you occasionally buy this product, please kindly send this letter to a World Human Rights Organization. Thousands of people here who are under the persecution of the Chinese Communist Party government will thank you and remember you forever. This product produced by Unit 8, Department 2, Masanjiao Labor Camp, Shenyang, Liaoning, China. The people who work here have to work 15 hours a day without Saturday, Sunday breaks, or any holidays. Otherwise, they will suffer torture, beatings, and rude remarks. Nearly no payment, 10 yuan a month, which roughly is $1 a month. People work here, suffer punishment, 1 to 3 years on average, but without court sentence. Many of them are Falun Gong practitioners and who think differently from the Chinese government. They often suffer more punishment than others.
And maybe you can tell us a little bit about the kind of punishment he and others suffered. I mean, it was really, I found it quite shocking because it goes beyond just, hard work and being spoken rudely to.
Yes, they were pretty creative in the ways that they came up with new torture methods. And they even found cost-effective ways to do it. For example, they used the spare bunk beds that the prisoners slept in, and they would tie him to the beds and force his back to bend in an impossible angle, and leave him there for long periods of time. And he, at one point, just lost his mind due to the pain and the long periods that he was left in isolation. So it's these places were based off of Soviet gulags. So the kinds of torture they implement on political dissidents is very disturbing.
And I think you mentioned that people were not allowed to bathe or wash their clothes.
Yes, the odor in the labor camps and the workshops were very intense, and even if you don't care about the human rights condition, just knowing the sanitation of the products they were making is another issue in of itself.
Yeah, and I think there was like an issue. I don't remember if it was at this camp or another with the drinking water. They had to like drink from a muddy stream.
Yes, there seemed to be an issue with the pipes, and because it was in a farmland, a very rural part of China, it seemed like there were mud getting into the water, and that was their drinking water, and that was the water they used to wash their face and brush their teeth if they had an opportunity to do that.
It was really, really very brutal. So this Masanja, their products have turned up really all over the United States. And I think you found evidence that they were doing, Christmas decorations, Halloween decorations, maybe even a component of American Girl products. Was that Masanja? Can you discuss a little bit how this supply chain works, and what was it that was made at Masanja, and how did that find its way to American consumers?
Yes, the American Girl product was actually a different labor camp, but it just comes to show that it's not just cheaper brands like Walmart or Kmart that end up accidentally sourcing from these places. It's even very pricey brands like American Girl dolls. But this particular labor camp, Masanjia, there's a lot of evidence that they are exporting the goods. The U.S. I believe it's the U.S. Congressional Executive Commission on China even independently verified that one of the exporters had shared the same address as as Masanjia labor camp. So it's the sad part is, I think if people want, especially if corporations want to find this information out, if they want to know if their suppliers are secretly subcontracting to forced labor, they can, because when I visited Shanghai in 2019, right before the pandemic hit, I went to labor camps, and I mostly stuck to Shanghai because it's a big city. So as a foreign person, especially as a journalist, I wasn't going to get nearly as much attention as I would in a rural part of China. So when I went there, I went to the grounds of the camp, and I went up to the guards and I told them I was from an overseas company that wanted to source from them. They openly agreed to work with me. They told me what they made inside. They offered to give me a tour and show me around. It's unfortunately an open secret in the industry that any Chinese factory can develop a relationship with a labor camp and use their labor for very cheap prices. And they're also an extremely fast workforce, because the prisoners can be forced to work all night to meet a production deadline if something comes up in a way that their normal workers would not be able to.
And I think the work itself is almost tantamount to torture, from some of the testimonies you collected. I mean, the workers, their hands would be bleeding. They had no protective gear. They were often very hazardous materials.
Right. The safety of the prison workers was never a priority. For instance, there was this one workshop where people were forced to stuff down clothing with feathers, and the workers did not have proper ventilation in the room. There was just a lot of feathers in the air, and everyone was just breathing it in all day. These tiny feather particles, and they did not get protective eyewear. The feather particles would enter workers' eyes and cause them to itch and swell and grow red, and to the point where even for months after leaving the camp and getting released, one of the detainees said they continued to have eye problems.
Mm-hmm. And I think Sun Yu was making these like small decorative mushrooms. That, this sounds like kind of a handicraft thing, but it wasn't. It was very difficult work.
Right. The paper was very harsh. It was like a sandpaper like material, and he had to rub it with his fingers repeatedly. That was his main task, to smooth it out and get it to fold properly. And his fingers were just became raw very quickly, and he had no choice but to continue doing this work without any kind of protection for his hands.
And from what I understand from your book is one of the difficulties of identifying which products use this kind of prison labor is that these labor camps are often subcontractors. And I think you yourself, this is one of the more amazing parts of the book, you actually follow trucks coming out of these camps going to other factories. Can you explain a little bit about how the subcontractor system works and how you investigated it in Shanghai? I found that really fascinating.
Thank you. Yes. So as we know, most factories do subcontract a lot of their work, and there's legitimate ways to subcontract, of course. Rarely do you have a whole factory making the product from start to finish. But the problem with subcontracting is that there's so much subcontracting, it may be hard for a company to track who all of the subcontractors are. most corporations will try to make a list of approved subcontractors that meet the standards and conditions that they're willing to work with. But there's also a lot of hidden and illegal subcontracting to factories with dismal conditions and prisons and labor camps. And so what I did was I went to labor camps and I just followed the trucks to see where they went. And the same camp could go to a variety of factories, including one was a pharmaceutical, one manufactured school supplies, one manufactured pet collars, one manufactured, it was just such a wide range of products. And even when you look at the customs records, most of them are exporting all over the world, many to the United States. And I think one thing that companies can start doing is to write it in the contract with the factory that you may be sending people to follow the trucks to see which suppliers this factory is subcontracting from. And because this way you will show the factory that you're serious about detecting forced labor in the supply chain. Otherwise, for the most part, factories do get away with subcontracting to labor camps, and there's not much stopping them from doing it.
But there is an audit process that you write about. Can you explain a bit about how these international companies do audit the Chinese factories to make sure there's no prison labor, and how it is that they miss it so easily?
Right. I mean, Chinese auditors have told me themselves that these audits cannot detect subcontracting to labor camp. Most of the audits that they do. Unfortunately, audits are a lot of times designed to protect the corporation more than the workers in the factory. For example, when the Kmart scandal happened, they had to respond to the news media reports about an SOS letter being found in their product. And what companies like Kmart always say is, we conducted an audit on this factory previously and we found no evidence of forced labor. But what was the quality of that audit? I mean, to the unknowing consumer, unknowing reader, that sounds like a legitimate response, but it's really not, because there's many different kinds of audits. Not audits are made equal. You might have a standard audit that costs a couple of $100 that would check for very basic things like the cleanliness of the factory, how if the equipment is functioning well, if the products are up to par. They don't really check for working conditions, or they're not paid enough to check for more things. And then you have more expensive audits that might cost a couple of $100, maybe $500, maybe $1,000 actually, $1,000 or more. These more expensive social compliance audits, they will interview the workers. They'll try harder to document if workers are abused there or there's. But even those, the auditors tell me, even these $1,000 audits can't detect secret subcontracting to labor camps. So those two are useless for this particular issue. And there's a third kind of audit that costs about $5,000 that takes 5 days for the auditor to do, and they cross-analyze all the wage documents in the factory across multiple departments to see if the numbers add up, to see if there's any hidden illegal subcontracting going on. So auditors have told me that's the only way to detect unauthorized subcontracting. And if a company is not conducting those kinds of extensive audits, then they don't really know. They can't really say for sure if a Chinese supplier is using forced labor or not.
When I read your book, I mean, the question that sort of begged to me is like, how important is this kind of free forced labor to the Chinese economic miracle? We keep on hearing how that China is running out of low cost labor. Workers are demanding more. There's the one-child policy has resulted in, really a dearth of young workers. Um, so, I mean, does China, just economically speaking, do they need these free laborers?
I think historically they have benefited greatly from this massive amount of free labor. But right now we're seeing that a lot of companies are China has the Made in China 2.0, Made in China 2025 um, policy where they're trying to focus on manufacturing more advanced technologies and like green energy material and biomedical products and things like that. So they could try to start start getting known for those kinds of products instead of cheap, poorly made products. So you've seen people go less in that direction, but at the same time, the issue of forced labor is unfortunately getting worse, not better, despite the move to manufacture uh, higher quality products that would be harder to make in a labor camp. You, I mean, with the rise of the weaker re-education camps and all the different factors that are associated with them, the forced labor problem is only growing. And I wish I could say a specific percentage of the economy that depends on it, but unfortunately, we don't know that number because it's to this day, we don't have a full understanding of just how many labor camps in China are in China. A lot of the data comes from individual organizations or individual journalists that are compiling, bits and pieces of research here and there. We don't have a full data set that China releases that we can trust. So, it's hard to say. There's so many different kinds of camps. There's the re-education camps that the Uyghurs are in, and there's pre-trial detention centers that are also essentially forced labor camps. People are held there arbitrarily. They haven't gone to trial. They don't have access to a lawyer, and they can be detained an indefinite period of time, and they have to do forced labor there. And these pre-trial detention centers are working with exporters and making products for them. So there's many different types of camps that, and to this day, we don't have a full understanding of just how many of them are there.
Yeah, it's my understanding. I mean, I know there's like the what is it, the Lao Jia and the Lao Gai.
Mm-hmm.
There was I think the Masanja was re-education through labor,
Yes.
and that was closed. But then they have reform through labor. It's very confusing.
Right, there's many different terminologies. Actually, China said the re-education through labor camps closed because they were getting a lot of bad press about it, and one of them being this particular SOS letter that got out. Unfortunately, they have not really closed, and I visited a so-called closed re-education through labor camp in Shanghai, and it was now a facility called a compulsory isolation drug detox center.
Mm-hmm.
And it looked very much like a labor camp. There's barbed wires everywhere. There's prison guards. And when you talk to the so-called drug detox center employees on their way to work, they call this place a prison. They themselves think of it as a prison. And Human Rights Watch has also done a very, very great report on how all drug detox centers in China, particularly the compulsory isolation drug detox centers, are essentially reopened re-education through labor camps. It's very poor conditions. Everybody there has to do manufacturing work for grueling hours. Nobody actually gets any kind of care to help them with drug addiction if they're going in there for drug addiction in the first place. And you do have dissidents getting in there that don't have a drug problem as well.
I mean, I guess the headline story in the last few years has been Xinjiang and the labor camps for the Uyghurs. Um, I think I think the last estimate I saw is up to 1/4 of the Turkic population. So, you know, Uyghurs and any Chinese of Turkish origins, Kazakhs, have been held in these camps. This is a newer part of the story, but maybe you can tell us a little bit about where they fit in to the economic system. These camps are designed to sort of stamp out Uyghur culture and language, and you know they're an attempt to assimilate the Uyghurs, but they also play an economic role. And maybe you
Right.
could explain a bit about what is produced in these camps.
Yes, yes. The detainees have to attend brainwashing classes that are where they have to sing patriotic songs praising Xi Jinping. They have to learn Chinese, and they would get punished if they are found speaking the Uyghur language, or if they don't speak Chinese well enough, they would get punished. And a lot of them do have to do manufacturing work, and you know they're making all kinds of products, everything from PPE equipment to human hair extensions to the raw materials for solar panels. I think there's unfortunately not much they don't make.
Mhm. So these masks we're all wearing might be made in Xinjiang at a labor camp, for all we know.
For all we know, I mean, Customs and Border Patrol has been trying to ban these suppliers one at a time. They did make some larger bans for the Xinjiang paramilitary groups. That's very that's you know they own factories, and but they also are very much associated with forced labor. But right now, most products from Xinjiang are not necessarily banned. So yeah, a lot of these products are still coming in to our stores.
Yeah, again, I'm really interested in the ties between the police state and the economy. And you mentioned in the book a couple of, you know, kind of really shocking incidents where very, very young people were picked up and imprisoned in these camps, like a kid who had a fruit knife at a bus stop. I think there was another one who was a teenage runaway. I mean, is there any sense that the police or the security apparatus are rounding up people for the very purpose of getting cheap labor? Is there that kind of cooperation between the camps and the factories?
Oh yes, there's definitely collaboration, including the drug detox center that is run by the police department. It's not run by mental health professionals. Um, Definitely a lot of collaboration in terms of there's always the beds always have to be filled. You know, not so different from the private prisons in America where we have that issue as well. But unlike the private prisons, everybody here has to work, you know, 15 to 20 hours a day, making products for companies all over the world.
And I mean, I think you discussed this a little bit in the book. I mean, in what ways does it resemble sort of the institution of slavery?
Right. I, I don't want to make a direct comparison to America's history of slavery, because it's very different, different historical context. But the current mass detainment of the Uyghurs, uh, with the only reason why they're detaining them is their ethnicity. It's an ethnic-based targeting of the prisoners. It does bring, there are chilling parallels to slavery, because a lot of these camps are also have close ties with cotton fields in Xinjiang. Xinjiang produces a large portion of the world's cotton, and the US imported billions of dollars of cotton last year. And so when you have an ethnic group working in cotton fields, making products for around the world for no payment, it does definitely have some resemblance to slavery.
I mean, I can see some of the questions that are starting to come in, and I mean, I think this is one of the main points of the book is like, how culpable are we as American consumers, you know, with our incessant demand for cheaper and cheaper stuff?
That was, I do have some chapters in the book addressing this. We are culpable because our shopping habits a lot of times creates factors that push Chinese suppliers to outsource work to labor camps. For instance, let's say H&M orders 100,000 black hats for the season. A company like H&M or Walmart or Kmart or any of them. But then a celebrity suddenly starts wearing lime green hats, and now everybody wants to wear neon colored hats. So all of these companies are going to try to change their big orders to neon colors now. And when they do that, the key question is, do they give the factories enough time to make that huge production change? Or are these companies really just trying to capitalize on the latest trend and make as much money as possible off of the latest fad, that they don't really give them any change their deadline, and they will charge them a really high fee if they miss the deadline? And then in that scenario, the factory, if they cannot physically make this product in that short amount of time, then they have to outsource the work to really shady places like labor camps. Another factor that contributes to forcing, in some ways, forcing Chinese factories to leaving them with no choice but to outsource work to labor camps is just the cheapness of the price that is offered to the factory to make these goods. You know, there's a lot of, I've heard Chinese factory owners say there's just so many factories in China. We're all very competitive with each other. It's just so hard and so important to get a contract with a big corporation and keep them happy with us. So they will, a lot of these factories will go to great lengths to, uh, at, at all costs, they will get the job done, even if it means outsourcing work to forced labor facilities, because they cannot actually afford to pay their workers to make all of these products.
Mm-hmm. I mean, do you see any positive signs among sort of young American consumers? I've heard about, you know, more of the, this is a college bookstore, so you know, maybe you guys are young, some of you in the audience, you know, this idea of slow fashion, of, you know, buying more durable clothing, not throwing out as much stuff, not buying, you know, the latest neon hat that you're going to wear once. You know, is there a way of like, you know, kind of getting the younger generation, or, you know, all of us to be more mindful of the costs of, you know, buying a lot of cheap stuff?
I do have hope, because what we're seeing with the Gen Z generation is that they are interested in doing everything they can to ensure that this product was manufactured ethically, whether that means buying more goods from thrift stores instead of brand new, or even investing in more expensive products and owning less things as a result of it. This generation really does have a very different relationship with consumption than previous ones. And of course, they are still shopping a lot and buying a lot of cheap things as well. But you are seeing the beginnings of, I think, a mass cultural shift.
Mm-hmm. And well, there's a lot of questions coming in, but I wonder if you could just talk a little bit more about some of the people in your book, because this main character, Sun Yi, is just he's a very compelling personality. And from what I gather, you never met him in person because of the lockdown and the pandemic and his situation, but that you spent a lot of time with him on Skype. Can you tell us a little bit about how he came to be the author of this letter, and his education and motivations?
Yes, yes. He, from a young age, he had always dreamed of traveling the world. He always loved reading, but unfortunately, at the time, his family couldn't afford for him to necessarily go to college anywhere studying where he wanted to. So the only college that made sense for him to go to was one where he could learn engineering, and that was what he did. He was a college graduate. He had an engineering degree. He was an extraordinarily intelligent man, and he was very, very soft spoken, and gentle, and quiet of nature. When you talk to him, you almost can't tell that he is this really, really hardcore dissident that is willing to endure months of torture, for his political and religious beliefs. But no, he was definitely an incredible figure, and I can read a passage from the book to.
That would be lovely. Thank you.
So this was from this scene took place 4 years before the American woman found his letter. This is a scene from the labor camp. There was a window on the second floor of the workshop from which a paved road beyond the fence was visible. Cloaked by the shadows of trees, the empty road was barely discernible, but once Soon saw it, he could not unsee it. He would steal glances outside every time he passed the window on the way to the toilet. The road was always desolate, until one morning, when someone rode by in a red electric rickshaw. Soon's heartbeat quickened as he stared at the human figure. He had been there so long he sometimes forgot he was alive. When Soon first touched the gravestones his team was assigned to make, he was surprised by their softness. It was only then that he realized they were decorations. A guard later told him the merchandise would be exported to countries celebrating a Western holiday that took place in the fall. It was a new concept for Soon. Most Chinese people did not celebrate Halloween. He and the other prisoners coated the foam with a liquid latex before dipping it in black dye, which had a dizzying scent. They waited for the color to dry and harden. With a wet sponge, they scrubbed the foam to create irregularities that lent the gravestones a time-worn appearance. Smudging their faces with black paint as they wiped their sweat, they labored like this from 4 in the morning until 11 at night, their feet always damp from standing in pools of black water. The fastest prisoners produced up to 20 tombstones a day, but Soon, with his worsening health, could only make 5 or 6. The team was sometimes forced to stay up an entire 24 hours to meet production demands. Soon stole moments of rest by closing his eyes while his hands continued the motion of scrubbing. Fragments of memories came to him when he used to buy his wife gifts, shirts, scarves, and jewelry. She never seemed to care which colors he picked. "As long as it's from you," she would say. The decrepit building where Soon manufactured decorative gravestones used to house women too. By 2008, the female forced laborers were imprisoned in a separate, newer building, but for decades before that, they ate in the same canteens as the men and experienced torture in adjacent rooms. There were still bloodstains on the walls of what had been the women's torture room. where those who would not submit to authority or change their religious or political beliefs were re-educated. The men in Soon's unit dreaded working at night when their minds played tricks on them. They saw moving shadows and heard unexplained sounds. Some inmates claimed they could hear women sobbing, the ghosts of those who had killed themselves. Historically and presently, the women at Masanjia experienced arguably worse torture and degradation than men. The guards, as a warning, there is some descriptions of torture and sexual violence if anybody wants to pause, stop listening for 2 minutes. They gang raped their victims, who often vomited blood afterward. According to survivors, the women in the camp made uniforms for the Liaoning Forest Fire Prevention Department, shirts for a South Korean company, and downcoats for an Italian brand. But unlike the men who worked with feathers, the women did not even have protective masks. The clothing was exported under a commercial name, Xinyu Clothing Company Limited. Researchers from the U.S.-China Economic and Security Review Commission later confirmed that the garment company's corporate address was the same as the labor camps.
This is very shocking stuff. Thank you for reading the excerpt. There are quite a few questions here. Amelia, do you want to pick your own questions, or do you want me to go through them?
You can pick them.
I'll go in order. There's some first question. The list of companies selling slave labor produced products is so long. What strategies have been adopted to target these companies? I think, you know what, I'm gonna read the next question too, because they're similar. She asks, it seems like many of these inexpensive products are found in so-called dollar stores and at Christmas shops. Would it help if consumers contacted stores like this to speak about the problem? I'll put those two together because they, speak to what we can do here.
Yes, I think definitely it would help if consumers contacted the company, especially in a public manner, such as Twitter or Facebook. Go to social media and try to build momentum and have multiple people retweeting you or sharing that tweet to really get attention of the company. I think a lot of times when people call the company or write them emails, they may not get a respond, or the company would tell them the issue is addressed, but they don't actually feel compelled to change the way that they source because there wasn't enough of a PR damage, let's say. Let's put it that way. But unfortunately, it's not just the cheap stores like dollar stores. The Australian Strategic Policy Institute released a report last year that found 82 big global brands using Uyghur forced labor. It's been a year since that report was published, but very few of those companies have dropped those suppliers because that there just hasn't really been any momentum from consumers asking them to drop, demanding for them to drop them. And that report included some expensive brands like BMW, Mercedes-Benz, Nike, Lacoste. These are not cheap dollar store brands. So those are brands that can afford to do better, and wealthy people are buying these products, and there's no reason why they should continue sourcing with suppliers. So one thing people can do is to target the 82 brands that were listed in this report by the Australian Strategic Policy Institute.
There's several questions about the reporting process. And again, I'm going to, since we have limited time, I'm going to put them together. Somebody asked, it sounds like you were able to interview people the Chinese government might not have wanted you to speak with? Were you concerned for your safety? Did you have to resort to subterfuge to get somebody to speak with you? Somebody else asks about what it was like to follow the trucks between the factories, and um, what would have happened to you if you were caught, basically. And somebody else asks, again, I'm putting these together, um, have you had any personal repercussions from the Chinese government as a result of the book or your earlier reporting?
These are all great questions. Thank you for being such a great audience. I interviewed a lot of survivors who had already left China, so I knew that they could be okay. When I went to China, I actually did not interview people because I didn't want to bring danger to anyone. You know, there's this saying as journalists, you know, as a journalist, when we go with our foreign passports, we automatically have a certain level of protection. The Chinese government is not going to execute a foreign journalist or imprison them for years at a time. But it's like there's like a ring of fire around the journalists. Whoever they interview, all their sources usually get into big trouble. So one way to get around that is to go on a tourism visa instead of a J visa, a journalism visa. When you go on a journalism visa, you automatically are tracked right away. The moment you land in China, the police will start following you. They'll stop to give you talks and let you know that they're checking in on you and that they're following you to make sure you're aware. And they'll stop you if you get close to doing any kind of reporting that they don't, if you get close to covering anything they don't want you to report on. So I know a lot of journalists who have come up with creative ways to circumvent this. You know, some book multiple hotels to try to trick the police about where they're actually staying that night. Although that's getting harder and harder to do with all the surveillance cameras they have and the facial recognition. But I'm sure you as well have a lot of tips based on your former time in Beijing as well.
Yeah, trade secrets.
Yes, yeah. So there's ways to get around it, but generally on a tourism visa, although you may have less protections, and most of the media outlets won't let you go on that, but you can actually go and walk around places you want to visit undeterred and unfollowed by the police, which was the case with me. I went on a tourism visa. And the other question, I'm sorry, I'm forgetting that one.
I think it's about, have there been repercussions since the book came out?
Just trolls on Twitter. I think there's some of them that are paid by the Chinese government and some of them that are just really nationalistic Chinese people that don't like how this might portray China. So getting a lot of social media attacks, but no personal repercussions other than that so far. Hope it stays that way.
There are a couple of questions about Xinjiang, or East Turkestan, as my recent questioner asks. Were you able to visit any of the camps in East Turkestan? And you know, to what extent do Uyghurs make up a large portion of the forced labor force in China now, and are their children as well?
Oh yes. I really wanted to go to East Turkestan or Xinjiang because I'm also I'm Han mixed with Uyghur, so I'm of Uyghur descent. But I was warned by a lot of journalists who are reporting in Xinjiang to not even try because you're going to get stopped, and it's you have to rely basically on satellite imagery to document the camps. It's very, very hard to to visit the camps that are associated with the Uyghur forced labor, unlike the drug detox centers and pretrial detention centers that are more general.
I would think that was a wise decision on your part. I mean, I will say, you know, I mean, journalists have done some very good work in Xinjiang, but most of them have had journalist visas, and it's an extra level of protection. And even as a US citizen, especially of one of Chinese origins, ethnic origins, you're not that well protected. You're not completely protected. The Chinese are much harsher on Chinese Americans than they are on others.
That's true. They do see you as one of them and not really as a foreigner. Yeah.
There's I'll do this really quickly. Within China, do human rights or labor reform groups have any space in which to address this issue? And I'll add to that question. I think you did mention that the Chinese media did do some reporting on.
Yes. Yeah. Yes, even the state-controlled media rebelled a little bit and did do some reporting on the re-education through labor camps that helped lead to the closure. So you are seeing a movement in China among people who do care about this issue. But unfortunately, the labor activists in China don't have a lot of freedom. The labor unions are pretty much non-existent. If they are able to form, there's not much they can do freely, and a lot of these labor organizers do end up in prisons themselves for doing work to try to improve the conditions of factory workers. So it's really hard for this movement to take off in grassroots programs, grassroots organizations in China.
Several people ask about what happened to Sun in the end, and I don't know. I mean, should you tell them just buy the book, because his story is really fascinating. Between his romance with his wife and his dealings with this woman in Oregon. I don't know, how much do you want to reveal of that?
So my book does reveal what ends up happening to him in the end. So you can read the book to find out.
He's just as a personality, he really drives a lot of the narrative portions of the book, and he's really a very powerful person.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I just remember there's a question about child labor. I don't know if there's young people working in the re-education camps. It's for the Uyghurs. It is harder to document the demographics and the information about these newer camps, but there are juvenile detention centers across China that are essentially forced labor camps, and they are exporting to the U.S. I called some of these myself, and I said I was from an overseas company that wanted to buy from them, and all of them transferred me to their sales department. They all had sales departments, and they make all kinds of products, including a very sad case where one was making toys. So the underage people, maybe some of them were children even, were making toys for children around the world.
I have the feeling that is this is an interesting question, but I don't know if we have time for more.
One more question.
Yeah, this is the last one that came up, but I do think it's interesting. What is the relationship between the labor camps and the one-child policy? And I think we discussed this a little bit earlier, the shortage of labor in China.
Yes, there's definitely a shortage of labor in China right now. So much that China changed the policy to two children policy. Because we don't know the exact extent of how many camps there are in reality, we just know there's at least 1,000 that's been documented thoroughly. It is, again, it's hard to say whether these camps really have contributed greatly to the workforce or not. Yeah.
Okay. I think, do we have time for more questions or?
No, I think we can wrap it up there. Thank you both so much for joining us tonight and for that really powerful conversation. And thank you to everyone out there for spending their evening with us. You can learn more about this book and purchase Made in China at the link that I've posted in the chat, as well as Barbara's new book, Eat the Buddha. I posted a link to that as well. And on behalf of Harvard Bookstore here in Cambridge, Massachusetts, I just want to say have a good night, keep reading, and please be well.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.